In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Hello, ladies, and welcome to the program tonight. Tonight, I'd like to talk about something that God offers every woman, and that is the opportunity to take giant steps toward becoming the best version of ourselves that we can possibly be. God has gifted us something very rare in the scriptures in Proverbs 31, and that is this: a concise, clearly marked target in this one chapter description of how to be an excellent wife. And even if you're unmarried, from this chapter, you can learn the kind of woman whose character delights him and makes his face shine upon your life, as it says in Psalm 67:1. So I'm working on these qualities myself, right alongside you, soul sisters. So may God be with us as we work together on becoming all that we can be. So the Worthy Woman of Proverbs 31 is God's role model for time management and so much more. So let's walk verse by verse, beginning in verse 10, and think about the qualities in each verse being lived out in what God considers to be a beautiful life. The excellent wife, who can find, says verse 10, excellence. Excellence, as humanity defines it, is nebulous and is always changing and is dependent upon when you live and where you live. And aiming for excellence in the sight of men is a moving target. Excellence is rare, true excellence. And thus, the world's pursuit of excellence can leave us very frustrated. Excellence in the sight of God, however, is a fixed target. And that has never changed. And it's deeply, deeply fulfilling. The phrase "who can find" points to the rarity of this true excellence. Her worth is far above jewels. Rare things are often not only hard to find, but this scarcity, like diamonds or other jewels, makes an excellent wife more valuable. God has given every woman the power to choose to be rare. And when you reflect his glorious light, this is what makes us priceless, far above jewels. And you will eventually be noticed. What a gift it is that God is going to spell out for us in a living example, exactly what that rare excellence looks like in action every day. So verse 11 says, the heart of her husband trusts in her. So his heart is at rest, knowing that she is a trustworthy and soft, supportive place to land, and will keep her word to the best of her ability. Whether it's with shepherding the souls of his children, or with the income, or with his own self-worth, in every corner of his life, he will have no lack of gain. A little introspection can be eye-opening. So every now and again, it's wise to ask yourself, is my husband, or I'll say for those that are not married, are the people around me, are they better off spiritually, socially, emotionally, and even physically or monetarily? Are their lives better for having me in their life? Our role model here is beneficial to those around her. So being trustworthy then is an excellent quality in the sight of God. Next in verse 12, it says, she does him good and not evil all the days of her life. This goodness includes pre-married time. If you are at the dating or engaged stage of your relationship, you would do well to ask yourself, Do you love his eternal well-being more than any other part of your beloved, so as not to be a stumbling block to him sexually? If you put God first before all other desires, he will bless your relationship, and such will be good practice for this quality that you will need throughout the years to come, and that is enough forward thinking to sacrifice the present moment for the long-term spiritual, relational, financial, and emotional well-being of your family. Goodness is excellent in the sight of the Lord. So moving on to verse 13, it says, she looks for wool and flax and works with her hands in delight. This worthy woman was industrious and found joy in being productive. Some work, of course, is more pleasant than other work, but a happier life is found in following the mandate of Philippians 2:14 to do all things without grumbling and complaining. And we would do best to expect and tolerate no less from the children that we are raising, by the way. So may we never lose sight of the fact that often our work is rooted in the fact that we've been blessed and now must maintain the responsibilities attached to each of those blessings. In verse 13, the worthy woman is most likely happily creating clothing or blankets to keep her family warm and clothed. Likewise, we daily prepare meals because we have been blessed with food. We clean the bathroom because we've been blessed with indoor plumbing. We haul our children to the doctor because we've been blessed with modern medicine, and so on. If we do not lose sight of the blessing, such will help us to delight in our work that those blessings have brought into our lives. So, what can we learn from verse 14? Where she is like merchant ships, she brings her food from afar. You know, I think about the fact that often the farther your food comes from, the more diverse the flavors. This applies not only to food, but to all the other simple blessings that can enrich our lives. God invites us to experience an abundant life, but adding quality to any experience will require a willingness to go the extra mile. And I think that is what we can learn here. So instead of always doing what's easy, a wise woman assesses the quality of her family's experience if she puts some extra effort here and there. And when she figures out what's worth the extra time and what is actually a waste of time. So she's like a merchant ship. She brings her food from afar. Of all the qualities that make for an excellent wife, I find the next verse to be the most challenging for me here, and that is this verse. Verse 15, she rises while it is still night and gives food to her household and portions for her maidens. Now, I'm not sure exactly if the portions being given out here in this verse are tasks to the servants or food for the servants, because different translations are offering both kinds of meanings. But at any rate, I feel the general takeaway that we can learn from this verse is that of being sacrificial for the well-being of the family, putting the needs of the household above her own. This is a very Christ-like experience, and thus causes God to smile upon our lives as we model for our families what he has done for us, allowing himself to be exceptionally inconvenienced by sending his own son to die for our sins, as well as all the other blessings that he sends our way. So there are a few things in life I find more painful than sleep deprivation. So I think I've learned the hard way to sacrifice the fascinating projects that I may need to put to pull myself away from in order to get to bed early enough to get enough sleep so that I can wake before dawn if needed. So the next verse 16 says, she considers a field and buys it. It seems here that perhaps this quality helps explain that husband's trust in his excellent wife and his having no lack of gain. The quality being encouraged here by the Lord, I believe, is confidence. But this confidence seems to be rooted in being well researched enough to know a good investment when she sees one. In fact, the next verse points to her expertise when it says in verse 17, from her earnings, she plants a vineyard. So I love that she doesn't let her investment sit fallow because she's overextended herself, and neither does she seem overwhelmed by planting an entire vineyard. Perhaps it's no coincidence that in the New Testament, Jesus uses that imagery of a vineyard to symbolize spiritual fruitfulness when he says in John 15:5, quote, I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing, unquote. So the kingdom of God, we learn in the New Testament, is the ultimate vineyard. To remain holy and faithful to God is to abide in the vine, that is Christ, and to cultivate in our souls the beautiful fruit of the Spirit that honors God and gives meaning and fulfillment to our lives and strengthens us, as seen in the next verse, where it says, she girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. So the hard truth is that a certain amount of opposition is a great help to gaining strength. On a physical level, we see this with resistance training, when weightlifters build muscle by lifting an external resistance in order to increase strength, tone, mass, and endurance. And over time, the load is slowly and consistently increased, right? In order to continue gaining more and more strength. So it was no easy undertaking when this woman planted her vineyard, especially considering how the vines need constant pruning and training. So it is with your undertakings. With every burden we lift, we are gaining skills to handle more and more and adjusting the weight, adjusting to that weight. So the cool thing is to realize that over the decades, that the things that once seemed overwhelming to bear no longer faze us. And it's quite fulfilling to lift our eyes and to see how much we can juggle with the strength that God supplies and the wisdom gained by experience. So the next verse reads, verse 18, she senses that her gain is good. Notice here that God gives us the ability to assess our gains. And if we're honest, we can use the scriptures to judge with accuracy our gains and losses, to decide if our gain is good, and if not, to shift how we are investing our energy and our resources. When she senses that her gain is good, we learn here that self-worth is the result of doing what is right. It's like when the Lord said to Cain in Genesis 4:6-8, why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? Countenance in other translations is about holding your head up and smiling for having been accepted by our God. This kind of confidence that comes when we sense that our gain is good is not arrogance. This kind of confidence is simply an acknowledgement that living life God's way works. And thus, all glory is still his. So just as Jesus says in Matthew 5:16, let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. What a good reminder that even for the confident woman, she is to let another praise her and not her own mouth, a stranger and not her own lips. Proverbs 27:2. So next it says that her lamp does not go out at night. Again, even when everyone else is resting, this, our role model, is prepared to deal with whatever needs dealt with 24/7. Verse 19 says, quote, she stretches out her hands to the distaff and her hands grasp the spindle. This, of course, refers to spinning wool. which was a way to clothe one's family before the manufacturing and the Industrial Revolution, and has always reminded me to try to be wise about using my time by making things from scratch. Okay, so for example, if you need a coffee table, unless you really dig the process, do you really want to start by buying lumber, investing 2 weeks to build it when you could pick up one off of Craigslist for $30 this afternoon and spend the next 2 weeks instead in having a new family over for dinner, sending a card to a cancer patient, or preparing to teach a preschool class? So if you need a new shirt, life is short. The smartest move toward that goal may not be going to go pick cotton, so to speak. So it's a beautiful thing, obviously, when a family embraces some of the old ways of doing things, like making soap or going fishing or canning fruit or building a coffee table. But wisdom intentionally selects such things because your family enjoys the process and it brings you all together. It just doesn't make sense to sacrifice 3 days to save 37 cents an hour in something taking you away from your family that you might not even enjoy that much. So it's kind of like Thomas Fuller said, to be employed in useless things is to be half idle, unquote. So working smarter, not harder, is the key to good time management. Let's move on to verse 20 now, where it says, quote, she extends her hands to the poor and she stretches out her hands to the needy, unquote. How beautiful that, with as attentive as she has been to her family, this excellent wife is not so self-absorbed that she sees only her own needs or nothing beyond the needs of her family. Rather, she lifts her compassionate eyes to the needs of those beyond her family and still has reserves of energy and resources to make a difference. There's no better part of educating our children than bringing them alongside us in just about any service project that we undertake, so that they can also learn how it is more blessed to give than to receive. Acts 20, verse 35. There's a lovely Irish proverb that states, quote, it is in the shelter of each other that people live, unquote. So the poor and needy includes, but is not limited to, the financially poor and needy. We are often surrounded by those who are poor spiritually or emotionally. And like Mark Twain put it, great people are those who make others feel that they too can become great. You have the capacity in your own special way to go out and feed this hungry world, sisters. Women's shelters, soup kitchens, foster parenting, adoption. It's all a beautiful thing. And there's so many other expressions of this, of feeding the poor, all kinds of poor. Sitting with someone in grief, texting a friend an informative sermon or podcast, starting up a Bible class in your neighborhood or at your school or online or at your workplace. I've seen sisters all over the country in so many of the places that we have visited as we've lived nomadically, extending their hands to the poor and stretching out their hands to the needy. And this is beautiful, beautiful compassion. And it's the kind of compassion that is very becoming to the bride of Christ. So we see another trait in verse 21 where it says, quote, she is not afraid of the snow for her household, unquote. She is not afraid. God did not plan for timidity to be a feminine trait. The world wants to connect the quality of being willingly submissive to being intimidated or fearful. But the truth is right before wives are told to be subject to their husbands in Ephesians 5:22, all Christians are instructed to be subject to one another in the fear of Christ, verse 21. Men in the verses that follow are called to put their wives before themselves as Christ did the church, and as the church submits to the wise leadership of Christ, so women are to do the same with their godly husbands. So choose well a husband whose mind you respect and admire enough to trust his judgment. And unlike the picture the world wants to paint of the dynamic within a healthy Christian marriage, the truth is you and I can be submissive and yet absolutely fearless. We see this in 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6 in the case of Abraham's wife, Sarah, when who we see in verse 6, obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. That is, acknowledging his God-appointed leadership position. And the verse goes on to say, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. It takes courage to let go of some power and control and to trust God. And like Sarah, aspire to not be frightened by any fear, except, of course, the fear of our sweet Lord himself, which in Psalms 111:10 is said to be the beginning of wisdom. So we see in the remainder of verse 21 why this excellent wife is so fearless. It says, quote, for her household are clothed in scarlet. So all that work in preparation for the future needs of her family we read about earlier in these verses that resulted in her sensing that her gain is good, has given her good reason to remove fear from her heart. And it's not like she's just been the plainest, it's not like she's been in the plainest clothes that she can find, because verse 22 says, she makes coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. I gather from this that a woman need not have disregard for her physical appearance to be spiritually minded. This virtuous woman is groomed. The finest materials here are no sign of vanity or misplaced values. All of her inner beauty speaks for itself, and her fine linen and purple takes not an ounce of that inner beauty from her. A very natural look is trending right now, and it is so lovely. I love it. But let's be careful not to accuse the more groomed among us of being shallow, when she's also producing blessing the lives of those around her. Next, we see in verse 23 that, quote, her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. So, like it or not, how we talk and what we do not only has an effect on our own lives, but will also have ripple effects on your husband's opportunities and ultimately his reputation. So while it's true that we cannot change our husbands, we are most likely still the most powerful influence in his life. And some of the opportunities for leadership that come his way are in part because of our influence. So we learn here that even socially, an excellent wife is no hindrance to her husband. And he is able then to be of a good influence in our churches and our communities. And these skills that he's learned are often honed through the initial practice of leadership within his young family years ago. So verse 24 says that she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies belts to the tradesmen. If your husband is healthy enough to support the family financially, what a blessing. Not every wife gets that. Since my husband and I married so young, while I was still in high school, truth be told, we both worked until I was about 30. But even after that, I enjoyed easing our hand-to-mouth existence, surviving on a preacher's salary by always having a side gig I could do at home while I homeschooled our kids. So I found much fulfillment in that. So given that verse 27 says that this woman of excellence looks well to the ways of her household, I know this much. This entrepreneurial idea she has is not one that has taken over her mind and her life so that she's unable to keep a good eye on what's going on among her household. If we choose to live in a smaller, more humble space in order to focus on and attend to first things first, then that's a choice you'll never regret when you look back on your life, that you carved out more family time. If you manage your time right, you can have a surplus of it to enjoy adding to that financial stability of your family. And we'll find plenty of people, you can find plenty of people online helping women find ways to make such an income from home, if that's your thing. When you involve the kids somehow, that can be a great learning experience for them. And over time, they'll likely enjoy the feeling of making a contribution as well. Verse 25 is my favorite. It says that strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. I love this because it shows that we can expect the cumulative effect over time of everything we have read so far. The world sometimes defines strength as a sort of brashness, being unnecessarily loud or demanding or boisterous or shocking or shameless. But all of these false ideas of strength are at the expense of dignity. I love that our role model wears strength and dignity, and that she's smiling because she's done her best to cover her bases. No one has a crystal ball for what challenges may lie before us, yet to a great degree, what we are taking away from this study, I believe, of Proverbs 31 is that, come what may, we can lay down some foundations in our character that will truly ease our way. It says next that she opens her mouth in wisdom. I think everyone listening to this wants to make a difference for good in the world by providing helpful, practical information to help others navigate life. So how did the worthy woman of Proverbs 31 get that wisdom? The scriptures point out that there's several ways that this happens. First, there must be a desire. For God says in James 1:5 that if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him, unquote. So, of course, experience offers an opportunity to gain wisdom, but only if we've properly understood our experiences through the lens of God's perfect wisdom, put in writing for our learning. Proverbs 2:6 says, "For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." The words of God, listened to and prayed about and meditated upon every day, is irreplaceable in our pursuit of wisdom. Next it says, "And the teaching of kindness is on her tongue." This proverb says that this isn't quality for an excellent woman. And here, the excellent woman is not only kind, she teaches others to be kind. This quality reminds me of the imperishable quality that God said is precious in his sight, and that is the gentle and quiet spirit. When we are kind, we are imitating deity by giving people a little more love and kindness than they deserve. Kindness is something that we do best to make the first move to express in our relationships. As someone has noted, if the world seems cold to you, kindle fires to warm it, unquote. Kindness creates warmth. We touched on verse 27, where it says she looks well to the ways of her household, and it goes on to add, she does not eat the bread of idleness. Diligence is a quality that God says makes us exceptional. No, not just being busy in and of itself, but rather making our work in keeping with our purpose is so that we have something to show for. It beats things like Wordle or crossword puzzles or word searches. We have no time to waste, loved ones. Yes, do whatever rejuvenates you, but we have no time to waste, and we best recreate in the ways that will leave us in some way better. And we do best to train our children also to not eat the bread of idleness, but to make a worthy contribution to helping the family highly function. So verse 28, her children rise up and bless her, and her husband also, and he praises her, saying, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all, unquote. Of course, we must do what we need to do, regardless of how much praise we get in return. And if you're a wife of an ungrateful husband or a mother of ungrateful children, my heart goes out to you. Maybe it'll come later, as they realized in their adulthood the level of sacrifice you put in to prepare them for a happy life. In the meantime, God knows. And that's what really matters. I think the next verse speaks to this when it says, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. We see in this even in men, right? Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, even in men. When we see them, sometimes men will use their good looks or smooth talking to try to get their way. I hope everyone listening to this can see through that. The rest of this verse says, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. So here's the thing. Even if we never get the gratitude or praise from the people we have loved well and sacrificed and served, at the end of life, we will get to hear the only praise that really matters from the mouth of God himself when he says, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Matthew 25:21. And that, my sisters, is more than enough praise. So the verse 31 says, give her the product of her hands. What a reminder to give your mother the honor, grace, and gratitude and acts of service that you hope one day you will receive from your own children. And lastly, the proverb ends with, and let her works praise her in the gates. This reputation she enjoys in her community, though never the motivation for doing the virtuous thing she has done, turns out to be simply the natural result of her life. Hey, what if we did this? What if this week we each sent a card to a woman who is least looking to be noticed for the bright light she shines? And we wrote her a sweet note or text or an email. And we could also do this, throw a little reverse gossip out there by saying kind things that are true behind each other sister's backs without telling her that you've been talking her up behind her back. Let her works praise her in the gates. Well, I hope this program has been of use to you in knowing what to aim for in terms of becoming in the sight of the Lord a woman of excellence. Like I said at the beginning, I'm working on these qualities myself right alongside you, soul sisters. So next week, we're going to continue our conversation about compassion. That's kind of our theme for this month. And I'll just conclude with our regular announcements that we invite you to, we invite our viewers to check out the live program called Answering Religious Error on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern. There are a panel of preachers are presently discussing various ways to keep your head on straight. And they also have a weekly panel that offers to answer any of your Bible questions. So that Q&A is on Wednesdays at, I think they've switched it to 9 a.m. Eastern time. And so thank you so much for joining. Good night, sisters.